Hello and welcome to A Critical Dragon, where I talk about narrative in film, television, and in books. And today I'm joined by Dr. Philip Chase. Philip, hello!
Hello, AP. It is an honor to be here and a joy. So thank you for having me on A Critical Dragon once again.
And I do like the way that you say it's an honor and a joy, because I think sometimes like we do these things, we clearly enjoy ourselves. We do
Yeah.
it for fun. But it's
Yep.
so nice that you make that effort to make it sound formal and polite. To try and disguise the fact that this is just what we do for a bit of a laugh. But the reason we are here today is we're going to have a spoiler chat, full spoilers for The God Is Not Willing, book one of the Witness Trilogy, the new trilogy by Erikson. And it is something of a sort of sequel or follow-up to the Malazan Book of the Fallen. And we've had a non-spoiler chat on your channel.
Yes.
And we had a lot of fun with that. But because this is a new book, and because it was spoiler-free, we were tiptoeing round things to try and give people a flavor of what the book is. And even more so than normal, because this is a new book. And this is only now coming out in the US. It's been out in a couple of the other markets already.
Yeah.
But it is just coming out in the States. And we're very aware of readers who have not read it and do not want to be spoiled. So what I will say now, as an absolute warning to people, if you don't want to be spoiled, watch the discussion that Philip and I had on his channel. It's spoiler free. This one is going to be full of spoilers from the very beginning. And I hope that you come back afterwards, after you've read it, and watch the video, and I hope it's entertaining and enjoyable then.
Yeah. And one other thing, don't forget to tell your viewers there's going to be another spoiler discussion with this guy, right?
And that we are going to have a spoiler-filled discussion with Erikson about The God Is Not Willing. And I'm not quite sure when that is going to be scheduled, but it is going to happen, and it will be up again. Well, it's going to be on my channel because it's going to have spoilers in it.
Yeah.
And I don't want people accidentally clicking on things and Philip then getting nasty comments going, but your stuff's usually spoiler-free.
Yeah, no, that's going to be a blast. That is a special occasion for the release of The God Is Not Willing in North America, I guess. Is that what
I think actually it's just the US market, because I think it's already out in Canada.
Oh, so we're last. Okay.
Well, no, I doubt the French and Spanish translations are out, or the English and Czech translations.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
But so let's get started on this. And for a slight difference from what we did, like usually we talk a lot about theme, but I thought this time, if we focus slightly more on character, we'll talk about the characters, we'll link them to the various plot threads. Actually, that's a good place to start. Well, let's talk about the plot threads. We'll focus on the characters to do with those plot threads, and then we'll sort of try and link that to theme as we go along, just so people have an idea of the kind of structure of this.
Fantastic.
That suit you?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So should we start with one of the central ones? For example,
well let's start with how many plot threads would you say are in this? Because this is a point of discussion actually that I quite enjoy.
Yeah, I mean, there's one way of viewing it where you could say there are essentially two. One being the Malazans, the other being Rants' side of things, I guess you could say. But he brings in a lot of other threads along with him. He's kind of an umbrella that brings in several other threads. For example, the Teblors. They kind of get merged with his part of the story, right? I mean, so you could say just two, but I think there would be some subplots underneath, probably both of them, actually, for that matter. Yeah.
Well, if and the way I would sort of think about it, from a slightly more structural point of view, let's say you have all of these different plot elements. Not every plot element is going to be a full plot thread, but Rant's storyline is a central plot thread, and connected to that is the Teblor plot thread. So the Teblor will connect to Rant's plot thread. So he gains basically a plot thread and a half. But because of Sarlis being Rant's mother,
Right.
acting as a point of connection, Rant's plot thread links through Sarlis to the Malazan plot thread, which is the
Yeah.
other sort of central plank. And once you're on this central plank of the Malazan plot thread, with Sarlis connecting it to Rant, you can then see mirroring the sort of the connection with the T-Blur that we had with Rant, the connection coming off to deal with the mercenary company.
Yes. Yeah. Excellent. And because this is a Malazan book, there's a hell of a lot of convergence too.
and and yeah, and we get to see the interplay of all of these things. But what I like about this is, again, it's one of the things why I am drawn to structural readings as an initial approach to a lot of stuff, is seeing these points of connection between apparently disparate elements. And once you find those points of connection, you find these fracture points, or these intense points between plot threads that link them. And that's where you're going to see an overlap of theme. That's where you're going to see an overlap of ideas and concepts. And they help focus then your attention when you're doing like analysis and close reading, or you're trying to find why key scenes appear to be such key scenes. Quite often it's reflected in the structure, but you have this very nice two central things with sort of two branching elements that come into it, and then another one that's in between that links the two central ones. And you go, it is such a beautiful, simple, straightforward structure. And yet it's one of those ones you go, oh, but there's that thing and then this thing happens. And it's only when you take that step back to think about the connections between them that you realize that the structure is there and is present.
Brilliant. You should have made a diagram for this one. I mean, it would be slightly more complicated than your triangle.
Yeah. Moving past triangles, you're now getting into multiple moving parts. No, not going to happen. But I'm sure someone in the comments will go, you're talking about two parallel lines with two lines connecting and then a little V shape in between. It's not complicated, AP. And you go, you didn't see my school artwork, did you?
I've seen some of your artwork.
Oh, you know what, Philip? I think during this video, I will flash up that photographic evidence taken from CCTV cameras of Dr. Fantasy performing nefarious deeds. It's just going to get inserted into this video so people know how nefarious you actually are.
Stealing candy from orphanages and lighting
Burning
books on fire. Yeah.
Disgraceful. But anyway, so we're off the point. The God is not willing. We want to talk about this. Let's talk about Rant's plot thread.
Yeah, let's
start there because this enormous, emotional, poignant, at times harrowing, yet beautiful, and at times affirming. It is a very powerful and emotive thread that runs through the book. It is an arc that obviously Rant is on. It has points of connection to the events from House of Chains, what Karsa did, because Rant is the bastard child conceived through the rape of Sarlis.
Right.
And
while Karsa had imbibed the blood oil and gave it to her as well, and that has major consequences as well for her. So.
And this is the ramifications of Karsa's actions. So while Karsa is not in this book, it is the Witness Trilogy, not the Karsa Trilogy, the Witness Trilogy. It is about understanding the ramifications of the past and what they mean for the now, what they mean for the present. And, you know, we can tie it into the concept of sins of the father. We can tie it into actions always have consequences. But with Rant, we have almost a traditional coming of age narrative, the traditional almost quest, but obviously done in an Eriksonian, Malazan fashion, which is not quite usual. So why don't you lead us off on this one?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. I mean, obviously, the theme of innocence is very prominent in Rant's thread, and he grows up in a parochial area. So there is that. So even normal kid growing up in a parochial area tends to be a little more, I suppose, in some ways naive than a kid who grows up in a more worldly urban setting and that sort of thing. So there's that, but there's also his brutal isolation. And this is a result of his hybridity. He is half Tiblor and half human. He is regarded as monstrous by the people of Silver Lake. He is regarded as something of a freak. He is avoided. He is persecuted. So he's very isolated, and that also adds to his innocence, I think, because he hasn't grown up with a lot of things explained to him, and his mother is in no state to explain to him the way the world works. She is barely functional, and she's doing everything in her power to protect him and shelter him, and that's about as much as she can give. So he is really cast adrift in many ways, and he is a character who, without knowing what all this stuff is, has inherited the legacy of his biological father's violence and his actions. And also he's inherited the legacy of the slavery and the hatred between the humans and the Tiblor. And that's also weighing on him, and he doesn't even know or understand all of this. So in many ways, he begins under very tragic circumstances. But there is something innocent and pure about him that wins me over, certainly as a reader, right away, that I'm pulling for this character. I want him to not just survive, but to come to an understanding of the world that isn't painful for him, that doesn't involve more suffering. And that is something I want to protect, along with some of the characters that he meets along the way. So that's how I would describe him to begin with.
Yeah, and again, one of the things that is obviously recurring in a lot of the Malazan books is people go, oh, but that plot thread didn't go anywhere, or where were the ramifications or repercussions for this? And of course, the styling of the Malazan Book of the Fallen is that it is a complete narrative, but it has a very specific focus, and a very specific framing. And this is now picking up on one of those elements that whatever happened to it, you go, yeah, you can't tell all of the things when you're telling the story of a world and a story of these world shaping events. There are going to be personal elements or smaller elements of that grand narrative that don't fit. So they don't appear then. And now we're seeing the repercussions of it, because these things do have repercussions. Erikson never forgot about them.
Yeah.
And he felt it was important to tell this aspect of the story, which is why it doesn't start with Karsa going, right, I'm ending civilization.
Right.
But I think this is something that's very difficult for people, particularly at the start of a book, because Rant leaving the village is instigated because his mother abuses him, sexually abuses him, rapes him.
Right.
And it's put into the context of she has been shunned by her society, by the residents of Silver Lake, because she was the victim of rape and was essentially poisoned by the blood oil. And they never tried to cure her. And we see this, and I don't want to get, this is a very heavy topic, particularly for the start of a video talking about a book that we both very much enjoy.
Right.
But when we think of communities and how when someone has suffered sexual abuse and sexual assault like that, the blame that gets shifted onto the victim, the shame that gets shifted onto the victim. Yeah. And instead of embracing them and helping them, quite often they are shunned and pushed away.
Right.
And we can see this even with Rant's hybridity, that it doesn't take a significant step to move beyond Tiblor human hybrid, and the Tiblor being a set of slaves that were taken by the residents, to make further points of connection about children of mixed race parents at certain periods in history in certain cultures.
That's right.
Or even in other cultures, children of parents from different religions. That this, when we take a step back from the literal diegetic narrative elements and think about it conceptually, and think about it in terms of Rant being the child of a union that is not approved of, as well as Rant being the child of rape and the connotations associated with that. A lot of this is being mixed together to present this concept of a child that is bearing the abuse and censure and shame that they had no part in, they never asked for, and yet they are tortured and blamed by the other residents. Rant does not understand that his friends, the other children who throw rocks at him, he doesn't understand why they throw rocks.
Right.
You know, a lot of that is packed into this, and it is why it is very, very powerful, and it is very emotive and harrowing and poignant. But I don't want people to get the wrong impression. This isn't a flippant or facetious exploration of it. It isn't an exploration of this thing just for the sake of it. Nor is it didactic. Nor is it Erikson going on a moralistic rant about these things.
Right.
It, like so much of the Malazan Book of the Fallen, it is a very heartfelt exploration of this, and it tries to portray it as honestly as it can to the reader, and that is one of the things that I appreciate. So what do you think about that, looking at it from that kind of lens?
Yeah, I agree with you, and there is something, I don't know if we're ready to move on to other elements of his thread, but as you were speaking, you made me think about how it's sort of ironic that the beginning of the sort of light in his part of the story is the friendship that he strikes up with Damas. And that introduces, I think, a bit of hope to Rant, because literally Damas saves his life, but he also becomes his first friend. And that is such deep significance in this story for Rant. And he wins Rant's undying loyalty as a result of this. Now, the irony is that Damas was involved in the slave trade. He was involved in tracking down the Teblor. He was involved very much in Karsa's story back in, book 4 of the Malazan Book of the Fallen. So House of Chains is Damas is not a nice person. He's an awful person. He's a terrible human being there. But there's an irony here that he is the one who both saves Rant's life, but introduces this element of hope, I think, in his story. Hope because he strikes up this friendship. And it's the first time Rant is leaving behind that Silver Lake and is going out into a wider world. And I think it's very significant that he's not doing so alone. And that the role that Damas plays as a kind of not just friend, but also in a way, a bit of a father figure as well. And what that does to his character and how that introduces into Rant's thread, the theme of redemption as well. So we have the innocence, we have the coming of age with Rant himself, but then we get this major theme of redemption introduced through Damas and his interactions with Rant. And Damas himself never feels that he's done anything that redeems what he has done in the past. He's very, very, one of the things that I think that won me over to him in a way, to admiring him as a character, is his honesty. He's very honest about himself and with himself. Perhaps he's a bit gloomy, actually, but he doesn't forgive himself. He doesn't say, well, I saved one kid, so the lifetime of tracking down slaves is gone. No, it's not like that at all. He's actually very aware of the irony of him saving this boy and taking Rant somewhere that might be a safe place for him. I find it very compelling.
And I think your point about Damas is great, because it goes to this thing about complex characters, and it's not complex in the sense that, oh, they have all of these traits and then, you know, the feet of clay and but they're still a good guy. Damas has one of the darkest pasts that we can imagine. He was involved in capturing and selling people. He was a slaver.
Right.
No, can that ever be redeemed? And you go, to be honest, no, you can't redeem that. But do we write him off as an evil person? And you go, and that's where this simplistic binary of someone is either good or they are evil. You go, Damas clearly has a lot of evil in his past. No one is suggesting that him being good now exculpates him from all those repercussions. They don't. He talks about these marks on his soul that will always be there because of what he did. He's very aware of this. Yeah. And that element of honesty that you were talking about is why we can buy into his character. His attempt now to make up for it, not because he thinks it is going to make up for all of the evil he did in his past, but he is doing it now because it is the right thing to do.
Right.
And that helps us buy into his character. We don't forgive his sins, but we recognize that he is trying to do something good in this instance. And when he goes to his death, which he knows he's going to his death in helping Rant, because the T-blower aren't going to forget that Damas was a slaver. He knows he is going to die. That saving this boy is going to result in his death, and he accepts it. And he accepts it as a just punishment for the life that he led. He doesn't fight against it. He doesn't try to justify what he did. He doesn't rationalize his behavior. He looks at it and goes, no, I was wrong. This is right that I face this. And that makes his death poignant. And it makes his death actually quite emotional, because through all of this, we've wanted to like him.
Yeah.
And we do, in a lot of respects, like him. But we never forget where he came from. And again, so it's this, the acts of the past have meaning and import in the moment, that they are always with us. And we see that so clearly in Damas's thread.
Absolutely. And that ending with the added poignancy, the fact that he is, yes, he's on the rock, and he's been, nailed to it, essentially staked to the rock, but it's the bear. And the fact that he had been responsible for killing the last of this species in a certain area. And then
he killed the last male on one side of the mountain, and now a female and her cubs have come forward, and he gets eaten alive. Like, the dramatic irony here shouldn't be lost on anyone.
Exactly. So there's a sense of cyclicality here, and somehow the both dramatic and cosmic irony, I guess, in the situation.
But even the cyclicality of the slave harness that was used to capture Karsa is the same harness that is used to save Rant.
Yeah.
There are so many little tiny details that Erikson has added in here that as soon as you start teasing them apart, you go, this is actually really tightly bound together. And you see these, and again, people make fun of the fact I say point of connection a lot, but we're talking about Erikson's writing, and there this resonance, this echoing, these ties between apparently disparate points acquire such meaning because you recognize them.
And another irony, Erikson's the guy who posted on his Facebook, who was that Damas guy, right? So I don't know how he does it, how he includes all of these magnificent points of connection there. I can say it too. And he had almost like, there's just so many characters, such a rich world, that he was like, I think he asked for some help from his fans to remind him of Damas.
But he couldn't remember where Damas was left. That's what he knew who Damas was. Okay. He knew all of those things. And he went, whereabouts in the world did I leave him?
Yeah.
And he has been juggling a couple of characters over the Malazan Book of the Fallen, one or two.
To be fair, yes.
But
Yeah. So
what about Gar and uh, the brother?
Nilgan.
Sorry,
Nilgan. Nilgan.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, because the whole thing with Damas, coming in as a father figure or avuncular figure, depending on how you want to try and frame it,
Yeah.
and it's quite a serious and emotive relationship. And then we get the sort of the fun uncle
Yeah.
who arrives in no sense of responsibility, going to
Right.
say wildly inappropriate things and give the worst advice in the world to the
Yeah.
young person.
And that's Gower. His brother is worse. So
But they add a lot of comic relief
yeah.
um to
Much needed.
those
Much needed. Yeah.
scenes. And it's that banter, it's that the sibling rivalry, it's the telling of tall tales, it's
Yeah.
the found family trope of on the quest, it's the friends we made along the way. We see the importance of all that, and it's reflected in a very verisimilitudinous way rather than in a tropey way. It's
Right.
while we can identify it as a trope of found family and the quest party, it's the evocation of it, how it is used, how it is deployed, fits with the narrative, fits with the world, fits with the diegesis.
Yeah. And I'm also so glad that we got more of the Jack than I've seen at a close-up level, I think, than anywhere else in the Malazan world. I'm pretty sure I'm right about that. And the fact that we learn about war bitch, and that we get a more sense of veering, right? When the divers, I mean, some cool stuff happens in this book. If you're a fan, you want to see how veering works. This is I think the closest portrayal we've gotten, right?
And that's when we think back to was it Reaper's Gale, where Dejim Nabal or whatever, was it Reaper's Gale, the thing that was underneath the mound? Oh, Bone Hunters.
I think it's the Bone Hunters.
Yeah, it's one of the prologues. The prologues are all complicated.
Yeah.
Someone should do videos about the prologues.
Yeah.
But we got that sort of sense of veering into divers from inside, and it's not explained. And here we have the absolute classic trope of fantasy: young naive character out on a quest for the first time, sees something weird, and goes, so how does that work? And it's the open and honest, like, who else but Rant could have asked that question, and who else but Rant would have gotten the answer that we get and the explanation of it. And it's again this wonderful trying to explain to someone who is both a child and not a child,
Right.
who the character cares about, but is also, well, yeah, you know what, I'll just tell you. It's that kind of fun, and it lets the reader in. And we've seen this with moments where people were talking about warrens, and they've asked a question, and suddenly information about a warren is revealed and what warrens are. These moments add such depth to the world building, because you go, oh, that's actually that it fits with what I had in my head. I have confirmation now of what I was thinking. We had worked it out previously, but it's such a beautiful little way to do it, and it is classic fantasy trope.
It's cool, but I also love how Rant shows such loyalty. Said he actually picks up these first, he defends Gower from Nilgan, who comes in. We don't know he's his brother at that point, and he wants to kill him, and Rant says, no, I won't let you. And so he ends up punching Nilgan, and he carries them both on his shoulders. And he's trudging around with these two Jack on him. I just love the loyalty that Rant shows, and in turn, they become loyal to him, and that bond makes this thread so special to me and so heartwarming. It really touched me, and there are moments in there when you see them understanding Rant for later on. When they meet up with the Tevlor, and there's an initial kind of terrible tension, and Rand actually ends up, unfortunately, having to kill one of the Tevlor, who he tries to kill Damisk. And so there's a lot of there's tension there, and then there's this talk of revenge, and you're going to have to fight the big war leader and all this. And then somehow it comes out that Rand is a child, and everything just changes. And you see everybody's reaction, and Gower's especially, when Rand asks these questions that reveal that he doesn't know. He doesn't know this stuff. He doesn't know what it means to be an adult. He doesn't know what rape is. And the reaction of the other characters just got me. I mean, that was just such a poignant moment in the story.
Yeah, and not to undercut that, but it was something you mentioned there when he is carrying the two Jack on his shoulders.
Yeah, yeah,
Contrast that image with Karsa with the two heads of the Daragoth being dragged behind the horse.
yeah.
Again, moments of resonance, but here it is it's a much more you can see the similarities in the image.
Yeah.
But it has such a completely different meaning because that was Karsa killing, Karsa smash, Karsa Hulk, and look at my proud trophies.
Yeah.
Whereas what Rant is doing is much more innocent and much more positive. And I stopped them fighting, but I'm not going to leave them to die. I'll carry them along. And
right.
It's the same image, but altered, just as Rant is in Karsa's image, but altered. And this is why I talk about resonance, why I talk about echoes, why I talk about points of connection. And the whole challenge that we see in the T-Blore culture. And again, that moment, as you point out, where because of his size, they have misunderstood how old he was, and they just thought he was a bit slow. And then you realize he's a child. Now then, think about when Leoman was introducing Toblakai. How old did he say Karsa was? 17.
Yeah.
They not understanding because he is not human. He doesn't age or mature like a human. And again, it's a bit more of a glimpse into T-Blore society, a bit more of a glimpse into how they evolve, how they mature, how their society is structured. So a lot of that I think is very, very interesting.
Yeah. And it's interesting too how eventually his half sisters recognize, they see their father in him. And one of them remarks, well, yeah, he looks like him, but I can see in the eyes that, and she calls it at that point weakness. Is it her, the sister? It's one of the characters anyway, that refers to it as weakness. I see his mother in his eyes. And I think what we realize as readers is this woman is not weak. She's actually heroic in some very important ways in how she protected her son. And I think a lot of Rand's instinctual understanding of humanity, a lot of his beauty comes from his mother as well. So there's a lot of her in him too. And I think that's important. And that is something that is brought out in that scene.
Yeah, and again, talking about having a sense of emotion and a sense of loyalty and a sense of caring and a sense of not wanting to hurt and kill and maim, and that, that's weakness, that's a human frailty. And yet we go, no, but that's a human strength. And Karsa might be single-minded. Karsa might be focused in all of those things that we saw him in prior to this series. And you can, in sort of go, yes, that is a strength, having that single-minded focus, and that he will plow through everything. Yes, that is an aspect of strength. But think of the emotional strength that Rand has, that Karsa has as a deficit, that Karsa does not have, that Karsa was even only beginning to pick up the very bare essentials of as this new thing that he was going to have to learn. That is a weakness to Karsa. He lacks empathy, or he at least lacked empathy. He lacked those emotions. And Rand has them naturally. That's not weakness, that's a strength from a certain perspective.
Yeah, it's really beautiful, the juxtaposition. And Karsa's not even in the book, but all of this resonates so strongly because of the legacy of what he's done and how Rand is the one living with it, carrying this burden. It's magnificent what he does here. So we did talk about her already to some degree, but we want to add to Sarlis because she's kind of our bridge between this group and the Malazans. Do we want to add to her?
Yeah, and I think Sarlis is the fulcrum around which this entire book is built. That's the importance of Sarlis, the importance of what happened to her, and the importance of her healing,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
importance of people reaching out to help her and heal her, and how that is visualized as a sort of literalized metaphor, as this healing illusion that gets created so we can visualize the battle against trauma. We can visualize the destruction of this infection of the blood oil,
Right.
the purification, getting rid of this taint that has poisoned her, that
Yeah.
she needed help with. And then at that point, and I think we can talk more about that specific scene,
Yeah.
but then she goes on and she gets to choose her new life.
Yeah.
And she gets her life back because it's such a beautiful and powerful moment. It's not hand waving that this never happened.
Right.
It's acknowledging treatment for trauma
Yeah.
and acknowledging the need that some people have for help. And once they have been helped, you go, right, what do you want to do with the rest of your life?
Yeah.
You get to choose again. You're not being driven by the addiction. You're not being driven by the trauma. You're not being forced into positions by these things or by people rejecting you because you have suffered. You choose your life.
Yeah.
And that to me was incredibly powerful, both as the literal scene that we saw, as well as a lot of the metaphorical and symbolic connections and the concepts that are linked to it.
Yeah. And since we're talking about that scene, it's a way of bringing up three of the most important Malazans, I think, which would be Stillwater, Annex Fro, and Benger, who are the ones who step forward. Well, Benger sort of pushes the other two forward. But anyway, they step up. This is important because they view what they do as, and this is a theme we talked about in the non-spoilers, as service. They are there to help people. This is they are members of the military, but they view their mission as to protect and to help. And so this is very much part of, in their view, what they're there to do, helping this individual, healing her, helping her to heal, pointing her to a way that she can bring her life forward. And so that was very touching to me, that these three very quirky, and in Stillwater's case, possibly sociopathic, we have to talk about her some more, obviously, but the fact that and Benger is an absolute, he's a nutcase, and you don't expect him necessarily when you first meet him to be, because he's so almost maliciously, not maliciously, but he's sneaky and crafty, and he's always playing pranks on people, but to see them open up and reach out to help another human being in a way that puts themselves at risk too, in this incredible scene, it was very touching to me.
And one of the things that I find interesting, Benger hides behind that humor. He hides behind that crassness. He hides behind that trickster glee.
Yeah.
But why does he go to Annex Fro and Stillwater to heal Sarlas? Because he could have done it on his own. And he said no, but basically he needed their tits, because he needed women to be there when he is trying to heal a woman who had suffered from sexual assault.
I think that's actually a good insight. Yeah.
And the thing is, you go, yeah, he says it crassly.
Yeah.
He doesn't explain it in a nuanced and emotive and sensitive way.
Right.
And you go, yeah, because but whose idea is it to heal Sarlas? It's his idea. Whose idea is it to make sure there are women there that she will not be threatened by?
Exactly.
His idea. He has these ideas. He feels these things. He knows their importance. But he is one of those people who doesn't want to admit that. He hides behind a veneer. He hides behind a facade.
Yeah. Well, perhaps because to admit their vulnerability would incapacitate them as soldiers too,
and that a lot of people have personas that they create that are a way of protecting their inner selves from the world.
Yeah.
they create these things because it gives them some defense from everything that happens, because it happens to the persona, it happens to the exterior, it doesn't happen to them, and it gives them that little line of defense. If
Yeah.
we only ever read people through a superficial reading of that overt aspect that's there,
Yeah.
we would miss the truth of people all the time. And
Yeah.
this is what, when people talk about actions speak louder than words, this goes to the core of that. Benger's actions, his driving thing is to heal. Sorry, he knows how important it is. He goes and drags in 2 other Marines. Have they received orders to do this? No.
No.
He knows how important it is. And that's what I see here. And I thought that was an important point, because it is something I think maybe some readers might miss, because they go, oh, it's just more crass humor. And you go, but look what the humor is hiding very deliberately on Benger's part.
Right. Yeah, I think Gruff becomes aware that they're doing it, and he approves, right? And he's glad that they're doing it. But and Gruff as well. I mean, he's an interesting character to me. He's the leader of the group, the only one, as it turns out, who doesn't have some form of magery, and that's not immediately apparent if you're a Malazan reader. You're used to Marines, military units that have mages embedded in them. This is new, to have the Marines are all about magery now. This is an evolution in the Malazan world, which I found very interesting. And of course, Gruff being the one non-magical person in the group, being the captain who oversees all of these half-sane mages. He plays an important role, and I loved his character too. I just thought he was great, as he has some affectations, or he's a bit of a dandy, but he is absolutely, his heart is certainly in the right place, I think.
But he's also brutal and cutthroat.
Yeah, he's scary.
And, I love this study in contradiction, because I think if a different author had handled this, it could have come across very much as the character didn't make sense. It was made up of a whole lot of contradicting elements that didn't come together. But with Gruff, we see all of these seemingly contradictory elements: his foppishness, his dandiness, his care for his, he calls them his lovely or his darlings.
Lovelies,
his hand gestures, this very exuberant, almost campness to his character, and yet his brutal pragmatism and his straightforward nature, and the fact that he is a cutthroat soldier as well, and he didn't make it to captain of a unit just because he was engaged in certain wet work over the years. So it all comes together. It seems so contradictory, and yet he's this wonderful, complex character, and almost a foil to the complexity of Stillwater, who just in some ways seems bonkers and strange and wild, and yet is so full of life. And she has one of my favorite moments, which is where she's picked up the tent peg from the camp, and when the Hound of Shadow appears, she throws to play fetch with the dog, because that's all that the hounds need. They just need someone to play fetch with them.
Right.
And I had to stop reading at that moment because I was laughing so hard.
No, she is so vibrant. She just explodes onto the page, and she is the one character that you think, okay, there's no act going on here. This is just her. She's a natural force of some sort or other, with not quite the way most people's minds work, I think is fair to say. That she makes association, doesn't get humor the way the other members of the group do. And yet somehow she's still part of the group, that she's a beloved part of the group, and that there's an understanding, and they play along with the idea that she's not a mage, right? And she's got this conceit that she's somehow hidden this fact from everybody.
The fact that she has the tattoo around her neck signaling that she's an assassin, because if everyone's looking at the tattoo thinking I'm an assassin, they're not going to expect me being a mage, because no one's a mage assassin.
Right, of course. There's some logic there somewhere, I'm sure,
but you can see the logic to it. It makes sense. Like, you go, yeah, I get that. Except
yeah.
And of course, it's even funnier when you realize like everyone is a mage. When she uses her warren, they can feel it. Because mages can sense when other mages use their warrants. She knows. And the only one who manages really to trick people about that is Benger, because his warren is obviously illusion. And you never know when he is using it and when he is not using it. He seems to be using it constantly and playing tricks on people. And it's all about misdirection. So it plays part and parcel with that. But it's Stillwater, I loved her as a character. She is such a powerful voice, a powerful character. She provides so much unintentional, well, she thinks it's unintentional humor, but obviously it's intentional on Erikson's part.
So
and again, that balances out a lot of these poignant moments, these harrowing moments, these emotional moments that we've been talking about. The humor is there, and it is so necessary to give us that relief.
Oh, we need that for sure. But let me tell you why I think she's not a sociopath, actually. And it's because of not just that one scene, but this is my primary evidence, perhaps, is when she goes out of her way to save the children when the flood is coming. And the Malazans have had this encounter with the Teblor and the other tribal cultures, and a battle had begun, but then something reminded them that they're all in this together, this giant wave coming. And the Malazan, that we have to talk about that moment, but just in terms of Stillwater, she goes out of her way to save the children. And that is not something a sociopath does. She understands. There's something in there where there is, even though she thinks possibly sociopathic thoughts or murderous thoughts, but I think there's a level where she does understand connecting with other people, and she goes out of her way to save the children. And I think there is a level of her where she is stirred by that, where reuniting those children with their parents touches her as well. She observes it, and on some level there's a part of her that is apart from all of that emotion, but I think that she still understands it. And so I don't think actually she's a sociopath. I don't know what your read on that is, but
yeah, and I think it also ties into, if you think her saving the children, think of it in connection to Rant's storyline and his innocence and what we as reader feel. And in some respects, Stillwater's a bit of a stand-in for the reader in that moment, because we want to save those children. Even though up until a short time before, they had been the enemy.
Right.
But in that moment, they're not. They're kids that need help.
Yeah, that is such a flip there in that scene, which is so, I mean, we could talk about it now if you want, but it's just...
Well, let's talk about this, because it is...
Yeah.
I think this is a scene that... Sorry, I'm just going to shuffle in my chair.
Okay.
This is a scene that I think some people will go, it happens too quickly. How can the Teblor go from being the enemy and being on the minefield to now, oh, well, now the Malaz are just going to read it. This doesn't feel real.
Right.
And I can understand someone having that reaction, but not only have we seen this before in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, in the face of something so horrendous,
right,
we saw the Bone Hunters take in and protect the Eater, who moments before they were lining up to fight, but that sorcery being unleashed, they went, no one should face that. That was in the Bone Hunters.
Actually, it's not in the Bone Hunters.
Reaper's Gale.
Reaper's Gale. Yeah.
Bone Hunters and Reaper. You know, I'm just gonna say Midnight Tides. Um,
One of those books.
it involved bone hunters. It should be called the Bone Hunters.
Bone Hunters too.
The Electric Boogaloo. But we saw that moment. We saw Itkovian taking on the pain of the Imas at the world's most inconvenient moment. And people still complain about that, going, well, could we not have kept them as undead slaves a bit longer?
Right.
You know, we've seen these moments play out in the Malazan Book of the Fallen.
Yeah.
Seeing it here, what would you do seeing a tidal wave come towards you where you had power to protect people, even though moments before, yeah, they were the enemy, your job was to hold them off because they were an invading army. Then you see this tidal wave and go, they're not an invading army, they're people fleeing disaster.
That's a
And those are
perspective
kids.
change. Yeah. That's a perspective change for sure. Go ahead. Yeah.
And it's I genuinely want, you know, if people in that situation went, no, I'd still see them as the enemy and I'd still attack them.
Yeah.
I can't wrap my head around that, because when you see that tsunami, that wave, that devastation coming towards you, and when you see that they are kids, when you see they are people fleeing, that they have been forced into this position because they are fleeing this, they're not the invading enemy anymore.
Right.
And when you see that, I think it is the most natural thing to do, to go and see the joined humanity in face of that threat, that existential, external threat. You see, we are the same.
And I would say to anyone who doubts the plausibility of such a situation, I would say look at the stories in World War I, where you had the opposite sides in their trenches trying to kill each other for, you know, however long, and living in that muddy misery. And then, you know, there's the story, I think there's one about, you know, at Christmas, you know, and they sing and they celebrate together. It's crazy. Like, you were just trying to kill these people the day before, and now you're celebrating Christmas together. And there's this sense of humanity and bonding with these people. And there are stories like that. This happens in the real world too.
Or just and then at the end of the ceasefire, they went back to killing each other.
They did. Yeah.
So that scene to me does not read in any way as unrealistic, as too fanciful or too strange or not signaled enough. Right. We have enough examples in our own world. We have enough examples in the Malazan Book of the Fallen for this to make perfect narrative logic to me. I have no issue with it.
Yeah. And as far as seeing somebody's humanity, I have had personal experiences connecting with a person on an individual level where it's something that happens very suddenly, and it could be a bigger thing as well that you're all caught up in, like a giant wall of water or Christmas, or, you know, something bigger than you that shifts your perspective and suddenly makes you understand, I'm connected to this person here, right? For me, there's nothing more authentic, actually. I find that it makes perfect sense narratively. So
I will always remember our weekend in Paris.
Yeah.
But there are such powerful moments in this. The sacrifice made by the Marines. These elements, they work on such a deep emotional level. And you know, it was interesting to see. It's interesting to see, again, a different way that magic, the cost that magic, this power has.
Right.
And we've seen this byplay now between magic being an offensive weapon, magic being healing, magic here starting out as this devastating weapon of mass destruction in combination with munitions. And then suddenly, no, but the flip side to this power is the ability to protect. And it shows that dual nature, I think, of the best of the military. The military can be used as an offensive weapon, but it can also be used as a shield, as a source of succor. And it is complex, because we do get tied up in current events or recent events and personal experiences of things. But conceptually, that at its height, at its best, that is what the military should be.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. So are there other notable Molassans that we should talk about? We didn't talk about Annex Fro yet. I thought she was a lot of fun with her. What was the maw of essentially, was it a cannon or something?
An
I guess.
iron maw,
Yeah, the iron
it,
maw.
it's sort of an early version of a firearm because they've
I
moved
love
beyond.
it.
Because we saw obviously like Fiddler and Hedge messing around with
Yeah,
crossbows that would lob cussers. And the
right.
natural evolution for that is the design of a handheld sort of cannon weapon of some description that you can load in different ways. The
Yeah,
natural evolution of the world. The evolution of Warrens now into the runts.
yeah, yeah,
A new form of magic. We went from the tiles of the holds to the deck of dragons of the Warrens to now the coins of the runts. And we
yeah,
see this movement basically of different things that we know the soldiers are going to be playing games with.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Well, speaking of all this evolution, you also reminded me of the character Spindle, who is obviously a connection to the Malazan Book of the Fallen, and the he has witnessed evolution, all this evolution, and now he's gone from himself being a relatively minor bridge burner, if there is such a thing, I guess. I mean, he was never the most accomplished bridge burner, I guess. Is that one way to put it? Because his magery was always just sort of a dud, unless you wanted to scare all of the local animals, right? So, and he had the hair shirt, and he was kind of gross, and he was not. People would tell him how much he stinks and all of that. So he was never like the most badass bridge burner of all. But here he's become the veteran. He's become the one they kind of look up to, and the one that they whisper about him being a bridge burner. And he has this experience and this nostalgia, and this melancholy to him. It's a lot of
he's
nice layers to him now.
yeah, he's the new Fiddler because
Yeah,
he's the veteran. He knows this stuff. And
yeah.
if you recall when Fiddler was trying to pretend to be Strings and people it was, oh, I don't believe that happened, that's all just a myth, oh, that's all made up. And you go, well, we actually know, we saw elements of it, blah blah blah. You see that same doubting of him, that Spindle was actually a bridge burner, oh, that's all just but you see how they do actually implicitly trust him. They rely on his veterancy, they rely on his experience. And I think one of the things that Erikson did in this book that I appreciated was showing the power and extent of his Warren, his power, his magery.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it was brutal. And
yeah,
you can see why now in that scene, when you get to the end of that scene, you can see why he's always so reticent to use it.
yeah. What he did to the horses to escape the water for him and Ohms, it was horrible. And you saw him weeping afterwards because he felt just horrible about what he did to them. So yeah, that's tough. But I'm glad that Erikson gave him Bliss Raleigh. That was a nice touch, I thought. That Spindle deserves to have a nice relationship there, which he didn't even believe it was. He was just kind of like, really, and he was a bit skeptical that she might be interested in him. So I like the way that developed. But
Um, and it's a lot of fun. The Ohms actually is a character I really like
yeah,
because there's this wonderful section, and it's told from the assassin trying to creep up and kill Ohms, and it's
yeah,
one of those POVs that isn't connected to all of the other ones, and they're
right.
sneaking up to kill Ohms, and then Ohms basically realizes that oh, I keep forgetting her name, the spirit.
Something witch, Tangle Witch.
Tangle Witch, because I keep in my head it keeps going to Feather Witch. And I go, no, wrong character. But
Yeah,
and Tangle Witch kills him, and it's
yeah,
brutal. Um,
yeah,
when Ohms, but seeing that whole this assassin sneaking up, and you can feel the building of the tension, and we're like, oh, we're worried about Ohms, and then
right.
Tangle Witch, it's like, oh dear, this is not going to end well.
Yeah. I think the guy's name was Flap, right? Who
um,
gets
and But when Ohms is being threatened and going to be killed outside of the camp, and he's in the tent, and he's been knocked on the head, and he doesn't know what's going on, and he's all confused.
Right.
That is Ohms. I am remembering the scene correctly.
It's Ohms when they attempt to kill the three sergeants of the mercenary company, who are really sadistic, vicious. Now those are sociopaths. You know, they are nasty pieces of work. So yeah. And
one of when Tanglewitch is ripping him to pieces, and it's pulls off both arms at the same time, and Ohms in his confused state goes, "You'd have to time that perfectly."
Yeah.
Because like when you think about it, you go, yeah, that it's something we see in anime. It's something we see described all the time. And when you actually think about the physics of it, you go, that's not what happens. It's like a Christmas cracker. One end will always go before the other.
Right. Yeah, that's a brutal scene. And don't mess with Ohms, I guess, because he's got a big protector there. But
that brutality, that violence is slightly obfuscated by his confusion and by his lack of clear perception, because he's severely concussed, and also is colored then with this humor because he's obviously confused and doesn't know what's going on. And because of that, something that could have been excessively graphic and excessively brutal, it gets softened.
And
and
now one other thing about Ohms, though, they keep having this rumor about him being a claw, and at the end, he reaches for something. It's not said what it is, but it's something that used to be around his neck, and that he doesn't wear now because it would give him away. Am I wrong in thinking Talon here? Are they still around? Or am I on the wrong track here? What's going on in that scene?
A Talon is definitely not a claw.
This is true. So I thought that was interesting. My mind went, oh, he's not a claw, he's a Talon. Okay, And why are they still around was my second question. But all right. So anyway, I guess we might have more on that in future, perhaps, but we are not at liberty to speak about that right now. So
it's a very interesting point.
Thank you. All right. Well, anyway, other people must have noticed that. And,
I'm sure that people had, because we've had this discussion before. We've seen it with other characters where there's been an assumption made about them, and you go, oh, they were a Talon, not a claw.
Right. This has happened before. Yeah.
And remember, this is the new empire with Malik Rel the Merciful, Malik Rel the Misunderstood. Like he's the emperor. He's in charge, and he's in control of the claw.
But there are still factions apparently in the empire that are not under his complete control, I guess, is what I'm guessing. But we'll see. Another interesting point, right?
That is a fascinating observation, Phil.
Good. Cool. So he was a cool character. He introduced some, I thought, nice elements in there as well. And I am totally speculating, people. So, but it's fun. And who else? What are other Malazans that we should mention?
The heavies.
Of course. Yeah. Like Folibor and Blanket and all these others with their philosophy.
But one of my favorite moments was the escalating argument that suddenly it's, I'm now going to recite poetry, and that's going to calm everything down. And I loved this. I know not everyone is going to appreciate it, but the heavies now not being their reputation for being dumb is actually turned on its head, because they are very, very smart, and instead of them being dumb, they realize that the complexity of things, they always see the nuance of things, which is why you have to make things very straightforward for them.
Yeah, it's pretty cool what he does with that. Do you remember which one it is?
The reciting of poetry, and I just went, yeah, you know what, I enjoy that.
Do you remember which heavy it is? It's Paltry Skin, perhaps, who invites the captain to speak in heavy language at one point. I think it's while they're on the rafts when they're after the flood is hit. It's a moment of a bit of lightheartedness in a very difficult time because of all the death around them. But I thought that was a fun exchange too, where the captain demonstrates that he can talk heavy, right? And he puts his Latinisms in there and everything else. I thought that was a nice scene too.
I love that playfulness with it.
Yeah,
I know some people are going to go, oh, but that's, and some people are going to get annoyed by it. But I actually enjoyed it because it was, again, something new. It was a different way of looking at these characters that people may have felt were stereotypes, the dumb brute. And Erikson is never content to just wheel out stereotypes. He always wants to do something with them, to play with them. I really appreciated that with the heavies. I thought they were a lot of fun.
He plays with that in the Malazan Book of the Fall, and there are plenty of hints in that series that the heavies are much smarter than people assume. And here it's just explicit, right?
Yeah.
So he's gone the next step with it, I think, is what he's done, like a lot of other things that have evolved in the intervening time, I suppose. So yeah.
But I think we've covered a significant point. Obviously, there's more that we could talk about. I'm sure if people in the comments bring up, oh, we want to hear about this thing and that thing, maybe we'll do an encore, Philip. We'll come back and we'll do a part 2, like we've started to think we're going to need to do with all of the other books anyway.
Oh my goodness!
But
yeah.
Let's leave it here because we've covered a lot. I think we've covered a lot of the big essential things. Obviously, there are more moments we could talk about. There are more moments we could go in depth, more characters we could discuss. And there's a lot more analysis even that we could do.
Sure.
I think we've delivered enough for one video.
I think perhaps we have, yes.
So I would just like to thank you very much, Philip. I really appreciate this. I love that you take the time, and I really appreciate having these conversations with you because it's so much fun.
Oh, well, it's easy for me to take the time because I have a lot of fun while we do this, AP. So thank you so much. And thanks to your viewers for putting up with me.
And for those of you still watching, thank you so much for your support. Thank you for watching the video, and we'll see you in the next one.